Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the workshop on resourcing the regional integration agenda in the SADC region. This is a project that we are doing in collaboration with GiZ, the SADC Secretariat, the EU, BMZ, the Wits Business School, and of course, the Wits University as a whole. You are all welcome. And to kick us started in today's proceedings, I want to introduce Professor Milford Soko, who is a professor of strategy at the Wits Business School, but is currently the acting head of school, to give us welcoming remarks. Prof, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Peggy Moyo. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Mil Soko, Professor of International Business and Strategy here at Wits Business School and currently acting director of the school. I warmly welcome all of you here today. I would like to commend the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, that's CAPSI, the Wits Business School, and the GiZ for collaborating to co-host this seminar on the theme Resourcing the Regional Integration Agenda in the SADC region. I also acknowledge the presence of other stakeholders whose contribution is vital to the success of this seminar, including the SADC Secretariat, international cooperating partners, research think tanks, SADC member states, multilateral institutions, such as the African Development Bank and other agencies, as well as academics and philanthropic institutions. As one of the leading business schools on this continent, Wits Business School has a very important role to play in the growth and recovery of our economy, both locally in South Africa and on the continent of Africa. We do this through developing ethical and agile leaders, and of course, through impactful public discourse, which is informed by the principles of critical thinking, innovation, and sustainability. This is key to our mission as a school. In ensuring that we have a positive impact on the world around us, WBS hosts regular public dialogues, debates, and seminars with top leaders in business, government, business associations, and academia with a view to unlocking innovative solutions to the future sustainability of our country, Southern African region, and the broader African continent, and indeed our planet. These events speak to which is collaboration. We're very partnerships with high-profile organizations and leaders. It is only through collaboration that we can really start to address some of the most pressing issues facing us as a global citizens moving into an unpredictable future. Challenges such as climate change, the current health crisis, the economic recovery post-COVID, the crippling unemployment rate. These are some of the issues which relate not only to the global South, but to so many parts of the world. This is a very important seminar that seeks to tackle a critical topic, namely resourcing regional integration in SADC. Or as those who have observed regional integration processes in SADC over the years will attest, a great deal of the slow progress in fostering regional integration can be attributed not to policies and other measures, but to the failure to implement these policies effectively. This is partly due to weak technical and project management capacity. It is heartening, therefore, to see this collaboration between CAPSI and GiZ designed to increase organizational sustainability as well as strengthen technical and project management capacity of senior officials in SADC member states so that they can plan and implement regional integration effectively. I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's perspective on the way forward. Thank you again to our colleagues at CAPSI, led by Professor Bheki Moyo and GIZ, for spearheading and organizing this initiative. I hope it will be the first of a series of conversations we'll have. Thank you, and I wish you a productive seminar. Over to you, Professor Moyo.
Thank you so much, Professor Mills, for those welcoming remarks. We thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. Colleagues, can I ask you to, those that need translation or interpretation, to go to the right side of the screen. There's a globe there. Click on it and you see there are options for English, French, and Portuguese, and use that function for interpretation. Secondly, please introduce yourselves on the chat function. We want to know who you are. We want to follow up with you on several conversations that we host here at the center. I now move on to introduce our friend and colleague from GIZ, Robson Chakwana, who is currently the GIZ program manager for strengthening national regional linkages program in the SADC region. We will come back to introduce Robson more in detail later, but I just want him to give his welcoming remarks on behalf of the partners.
Thank you very much, Professor Moyo, for the small introduction remarks. I would like also to join everybody here and recognize the acting head of Wits Business School, Professor Moyo, and also the director of Center for African Philanthropy and Social Investments at Wits Business School. I should make a correction. I meant the acting head of business school meant Professor Wilford Soko. Excuse me for that. I would also like to recognize my colleagues from SADC Secretariat, represented here by Mr. Dennis Emamu, who is the Senior Officer for Strategy Development at SADC Secretariat. I would also like to recognize senior officials that are coming from 10 member states of SADC and joining this training program. And also all the colleagues from our program, Strengthening National Regional Linkages, and Wits Business School, and all protocols observed. On behalf of the program and GIZ, I would also like to welcome everybody to this opening session of our training workshop that will be running in the next 2 days. Strengthening National Regional Linkages is a capacity building program for member states, and it wishes and it has been implementing different activities and measures pointing at building the capacity of those member states to implement regional integration agenda. I am therefore happy at this point that we are celebrating the cooperation between Center of African Philanthropy and Social Investments at Wits Business School, because we take this as an important undertaking in the collaboration of the implementation between SADC institutions, which include academic institutions as well as non-state actors. We are looking forward to the fact that we will have the opportunity to share experiences, but also to share knowledge that will help our partners from different member states to develop the capacity of resource mobilization. Because we realize from the program that nothing can be achieved without resources, and therefore it is important that as all we embark on the process of implementing the regional integration agenda, the resource mobilization must be an integral part of what we are doing on the day-to-day basis in our member states, as well as at the regional level. And therefore, it is our prayer and hope that the planned series of the trainings will help our esteemed officials to improve their skills and knowledge in resource mobilization, which would also help them in coming up with articulated plans to convince different international cooperating partners and other stakeholders. It will also help them to know their needs as member states, as well as at the Sadiq level. Allow me also to thank at this point all the other collaborating partners for the assistance they have given us to enable that this training workshop takes place today. And I would also like to thank the national contact points in all the member states for their assistance in handling the nomination of the participants to this workshop, as well as to the planned training sessions that will be coming in the next 2 days. And lastly, but not the least, I would also like to appreciate the support that has been given by Professor Beck Moyo and with his colleagues and the entire team of the Wits Business School for the effort and the collaboration that we are seeing the efforts today. And we hope that this workshop will be a success, and we'll be looking forward for more collaboration in future. With these few remarks, I would like to thank everybody and wish you a wonderful session this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chakwana. And colleagues, I reiterate the welcoming remarks made by both Professor Mills Soko and Robson Chakwana. And thank everyone for taking the time to be here, including the government officials, sectors from industry, international cooperating partners, the entire Wits community, and the broader philanthropic sector, including civil society. You have all received the concept note that has been translated into 3 languages, I hope. And Robson has given a broad overview of the project. I won't waste much of your time because we are running behind. But essentially, as the center and in collaboration with the partners, we are going to be providing 4-day training modules to senior officials from the different line ministries and from the contact points, focusing essentially on resource mobilization. How do you mobilize resources to finance bankable projects? We have lined up a set of resource persons that we hope are going to make your training impactful, but also help you to go back and implement some of the strategies and some of these approaches that will be given in order to mobilize resources to finance what is currently happening in the different countries. And so we are going to run 2 sets of cohorts. One is going to be online, the other is going to be in person, but essentially all of them will be geared towards assisting you with identifying sources of funding for financing mega projects, but also for financing some of the projects that might not be from the infrastructure or agriculture or industry, but how do you raise resources from philanthropy, from the private sector, from bilaterals, but also from multilaterals, but also how to use recent new innovative instruments that have been produced, such as impact investing, creation of bonds, and some of the PPEs that normally come into play when we talk about resource mobilization. So we thought we would start by having this conversation where we take stock of the region. We understand the implications of the costing that is currently ongoing in the different countries of the Regional Indicative Strategic Plan, but also understand some of the implications that the current region faces in terms of resource mobilization, the SADC Vision 2050. And so we thought, let's have this workshop, understand that, have the resource people attend, have all the cohorts to the training also attend, so that we customize the modules in such a way that they respond appropriately to your needs. So with that much to do, let me introduce Dennis Roemamu, who is currently heading the Policy and Strategy Development Unit at the SADC Secretariat. He's an economist by training with vast knowledge and experience in development policy. Prior to joining SADC Secretariat, Dennis worked with various policy think tanks in Tanzania as a researcher and with the African Development Bank as a sector specialist in the Tanzania country office. We have requested Dennis to give us a sense of the SADC Vision 2050, as well as the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan overview. Dennis, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Moyo, and greetings from the SADC Secretariat to all the participants. I will be presenting these very high-level frameworks, as Professor said, just for the participants to appreciate what we want to do, what we want to achieve as a community, and it will be quite a very brief presentation. So I'm trying to share, but I don't know if technology is allowing me to do so. Okay. So someone is sharing for me, I believe. So SADC's Vision 2050 and RISDP 2020-2030. Okay, so SADC's Vision 2050 and the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan 2020-2030. That's really what I want to present. And it's a very brief presentation. The outline is really a very brief introduction. I'll have a slide on the vision. I'll have a few slides on the RISDP, the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, and finally a conclusion. Now, to start with the vision, the process of formulating actually started way back in 2012, following a decision by member states that we need to develop a SADC Vision 2050. We didn't have that in place. And this vision is basically a framework which identifies where the region wants to be by 2050. So that's like 28 years from now. But it's grounded in an original vision statement, which is contained in the SADC Treaty. So there was a vision statement in the SADC Treaty, which speaks to a common culture, a future in a regional community that will ensure economic well-being, improvement of the standards of living and quality of life, freedom and social justice, and peace and security for the people of the Southern African region. That was what was contained in the original vision statement, which is contained in the SADC Treaty. Now, the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan 2020-2030 is a 10-year strategic plan whose purpose is much the same as the first iteration of the strategic plan which we had, which was RISDP 2005-2020. This was a 15-year strategic plan. But this one now represents an attempt to lay out how SADC can best move towards realizing the vision over the next 10 years. So what is actually contained in the vision? By 2050, SADC envisions a peaceful, inclusive, middle to high income industrialized region where all citizens enjoy sustainable economic well-being, justice, and freedom. So issues of peace, inclusivity, middle to high income in the sense that already some countries, some member states have attained the middle income status. So they will be actually aspiring to go to the high income bracket. Industrialization, again, which is quite key, where citizens enjoy sustainable economic well-being, justice, and freedom. The vision is based on a firm foundation of peace, security, and democratic governance. So that comes first as the foundation. And it is premised around 3 pillars. 1, industrial development and market integration. 2, infrastructure development. 3, social and human capital. Those are the 3 main pillars for which the vision is premised on. And then, of course, we have the cross-cutting issues, which include gender, youth, environment, climate change, and disaster risk management, all of which are quite important in the SADC context. So basically, that is the structure of the vision. And in each of these areas, you have specific objectives which need to be, which we aspire to achieve by 2050. And I won't go into those details. The Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan 2020-2030, as I said earlier, provides a coherent and comprehensive 10-year development agenda on social, economic, peace, security, political, and governance issues. It represents an attempt to lay out how we move towards the vision in the next 10 years. As I said, it builds on the achievements of the RISDP 2005-2020, which was a 10-year strategic plan, which became operational in 2005 and was revised in 2015. So some people may have heard of the revised RISDP 2015-2020, which was a 5-year strategic plan, but which was really part of the 15-year plan. It takes into consideration challenges which were experienced so as to ensure lessons and effective practices are captured and applied in future challenges. So in developing this new strategic plan, challenges experienced were considered. The global, continental, and regional context around which priority areas are identified were also considered. And it also reflects on developments in technology, geopolitics of migration, and SADC's development partner landscape. All these are issues which were considered when preparing this 10-year strategic plan. Now, very quickly, I'm not going to go into the details, but for each and every section, I want to capture a little bit of details in terms of what the specific objectives. So the RISDP covers 6 strategic priorities. The first 4, of course, the first 5, of course, are basically a reflection of what we have in the vision. So we have the foundation, peace, security, and good governance, which is the foundation. We have pillar 1, industrial development and market integration. We have pillar 2, infrastructure development in support of regional integration. We have pillar 3, social and human capital development, and we have the cross-cutting issues. But in the RISDP, of course, we also have this strategic area, which we call strategic management of RISDP, which is important as it is an acknowledgement that SADC needs to make some fundamental changes if it is to achieve the regional integration agenda it has set for itself. And in each of these priority areas, the RISDP provides strategic objectives, outcomes, and intervention areas. Now, very quickly, just some ideas of what are the specific objectives, the strategic objectives in each of these areas. So we start with the foundation, peace, security, and good governance, and democratic governance. There we have 3 strategic objectives. 1, enhance conflict prevention, management, and resolution, which is key. With early warning systems that are capable of tracking and monitoring political, security, and socioeconomic threats. So that's 1. 2, strengthen political cooperation, enhance democracy, good governance, rule of law, human rights, and human security. The common issues as far as good governance is concerned. And then 3, an enhanced collective defense and security system that is capable of safeguarding the territorial integrity of the region. So we want to enhance that as well. A collective defense and security system has always been in place. It has worked in several areas. It's now working in Mozambique, but we want to enhance that. So those are the 3 strategic objectives under the foundation of peace, security, and good governance. Pillar 1, industrial development and market integration. And there we have 6 strategic objectives. an industrialized regional economy, key, again, industrialization, a transformed agricultural sector, agriculture being a key sector. Number 3, interconnected, integrated, competitive blue, green, and circular economies that are sustainably developed for the benefit of all the SADC citizens. 4 is a deepened regional market, which is connected into the continental and global markets. So we're talking of the African continental free trade area, but we want to deepen, first of all, what we have at the regional level so that we can connect to these continental and global markets. 5 is a deepened financial market integration, monetary cooperation and investment. And 6, enhanced stability, macroeconomic stability. So these 3 specific objectives are actually sort of reinforcing each other. You need to have deepened financial market integration for you to have a deepened regional market. And of course, you need to have some level of macroeconomic convergence if at all we are to achieve a regional market, because you can't have some countries having, let's say, very high levels of growth and low levels of inflation in the same group as other countries which have very low levels of growth and high levels of inflation. Pillar number 2, infrastructure development in support of industrialization and regional integration. And there we have 3 specific objectives which we want to achieve. Number 1 is quality, interconnected, integrated, and seamless infrastructure and networks. 2, we have improved capacity of conceptualization, design, and construction, maintenance, and operation of the regional infrastructure and services. And 3, increased access to affordable infrastructure and services. So infrastructure, again, is a key component in the RISDP. The 3rd pillar is social and human capital development. And here we have issues of strengthened and harmonized regional health systems. We have issues of improved food and nutrition security. We have issues of increased access to quality and relevant education and skills development, including science and technology. We have issues of job creation with decent work opportunities and full and productive employment. And lastly, we have enhanced living conditions of the people through the promotion of sustainable cities in the region. These are the specific objectives we are looking into as far as Pillar 3 is concerned on social and human capital development. And then the cross-cutting issues. Again, we have several objectives there. Enhanced gender equality. We have a robust, the need for a robust and responsive regional statistical system. Statistics, quite important, also falls under the cross-cutting issues. Improved youth empowerment and participation. Strengthened climate change adaptation and mitigation. Improved disaster risk management in support of regional resilience. Sustainable utilization and conservation of natural resources, and improved access to quality HIV and AIDS services. So those are some of the issues which are covered under this area of cross-cutting issues. As I said earlier, we have something which specifically addresses issue of the management of the RISDP itself. So SADC understands that undertakes to achieve the following objectives in this area. First of all, enhanced institutional effectiveness and efficiency. And then there's the whole issue of financing, which I think is really the area of this workshop, sustainable financing for the regional integration agenda, how it's to be achieved. And then we have issues of monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, quite key. And then we have visibility and awareness of SADC, its activities and impact to all member states and globally. I mean, one of the critiques has been that SADC is not really known to the citizens in the region, so visibility and awareness is quite key. And then lastly, we have enhanced living conditions of the people through the promotion of sustainable cities. This one, I think, is a typo. Was not supposed to be reflected here. It's supposed to be reflected under Pillar 3, which is social and human development. So in a nutshell, those are the areas which are covered by the RISDP. And in conclusion, let me just say that RISDP will contribute towards the realization of SADC's ultimate goal, which is improvement of the standard and quality of life of the people in the region. That's the ultimate goal. we have to ensure that all resources are mobilized and directed toward the agreed priorities. But preparation of the RISDP was not an end by itself, but a process that was followed by preparation of a comprehensive 5-year medium-term strategies. So besides the 10-year strategy, we have 5-year medium-term strategies. And similarly, we have annual operational plans outlining the activities, financial and human resources, as well as organizational requirements every year. And as I said, M&E is quite key, so the RISDP will benefit from periodic reviews in order to respond better to the dynamics of a changing world and the interest of the region's diverse constituencies. And lastly, given the strategic priority areas which have been earmarked, the implementation arrangements which have been laid out, coupled with the commitment of leadership at the highest level, we begin that SADC is poised to excel. So that brings me to the end of this very brief presentation of these high-level frameworks. The frameworks themselves can be found on the SADC website, but those are the links there. The strategic plan, the RISDP, has an annex, which is the detailed implementation plan, which has also been approved by Summit. And of course, after that, we went into the exercise of costing this RISDP, this 10-year strategic plan. And I think the next presentation will sort of give more highlights into the costing exercise and the preliminary estimates which we have. Chair and participants, thank you very much for your attention, and that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for this insightful presentation. I think Your Excellencies, you'll agree with me that the SADC integration agenda is really massive. It requires all hands on deck, especially for us in Africa emerging out of the pandemic, almost emerging out of the pandemic. But there are looming challenges as a result of climate change, food insecurity, migration, biodiversity, among others. And all these have implications on all the pillars that Dennis has just presented. The big question is, how much will this all cost to implement? The next presentation is a video presentation by Daniel Chwandamira. Unfortunately, Daniel could not join us in person today. He's currently facilitating a workshop, a SADC workshop as we speak. Daniel is a managing consulting partner at DPC and Associates. He has over 33 years of experience working on various development assignments across the African continent. He is familiar with regional integration issues and the attendant challenges, as well as with its achievements. Daniel was the leader of the team that assisted with the development of the RISDP 2020 to 2030 and the cost implementation plan. And as Dennis already made the indication, the next presentation is really looking at the costing exercise of the RISDP and the Vision 2050. Can I invite the colleagues to roll the video for us, please?
Good afternoon, colleagues. My presentation is an overview of the RISDP 2020-2030 costing, and it builds up on the presentation that has just been provided by my colleague, Dennis Ruemamu from the SADC Secretariat, who took you through a presentation of the SADC Vision 2030 and also the RISDP 2020-2030. So I'm building up on that and providing a sense of the costing of that strategy. So I'll give very, very briefly the background to the costing, and I'll also touch on the process of the costing. And I'll also give you an understanding of the key assumptions that have been used during the costing. And I'll also then finally touch on very, very briefly the costs of the regional coordination activities, the national coordination costs, and also the regional investment costs. I must point out that at this point in time, only the regional coordination costs is what has been finalized. The national coordination costs and the investment costs are still being worked on and finalized. So the background to the costing of the RISDP 2020-2030 is that it obviously builds on the RISDP results chain, which has already been provided during the presentation by Dennis, where he took you through the architecture of the RISDP itself, and I won't go through that. But just to say that in August 2020, the summit approved the strategy, and Council then directed the Secretariat to develop a costed implementation plan. Then the Secretariat went ahead to develop the implementation plan, which would inform the costing exercise. So the implementation plan, it links the outcomes, outputs to key interventions that are in the RISDP. And also it looks at the sector strategies and the plans and indicates who is responsible for delivering on the outputs. Member states were then requested to provide inputs into the implementation matrix, which was then eventually finalized and has been approved. So we have a RISDP implementation plan on the basis of which the costing of the RISDP has now been undertaken. So the costing of the RISDP was done in three phases. First, there was the element of costing the regional coordination activities, which was driven to a large extent by the SADC Directorate, PPRM, who were in the lead, and other directorates and units in the SADC Secretariat were involved in this exercise. Then the other element was the costing of interventions that are being implemented at a national level. So those interventions being implemented at a national level were being informed by what was being implemented at the regional level, or what is going to be implemented at the regional level. And to do this, national costing teams were put in place in the member states, and also there was a team of consultants, which I was involved with, who assisted in coming up with the national coordination costs. And then the third pillar is the costing of investment projects. And this exercise was led by a special task team in the Directorate of PPRM, and also they've been working closely with the other directorates and also with the member states in coming up with the investment costs. The detailed methodology involved coming up with a template for the regional coordination activities, which was aligned to the internal costing and reporting templates used by the SADC directorates and units. It's not the first time that SADC is undertaking an exercise of this nature. So the exercise built upon the previous experience that the Secretariat had engaged in. And once the regional coordination costs were finalized, then this was now used as a basis of also now working on the national coordination course, which also had its templates that were utilized to gather the information, the data that was required. And also lastly, the regional investment costs, which I alluded to, were also undertaken. The costing exercise was also undertaken on the basis of templates that were put together to inform the costing of this coordination, these activities. The details that were captured in these templates, to start with, looked at the outcomes, also looked at the outputs, the targeted outputs, and also looked at the key performance indicators. And also we had the output implementation period, which was running right up to 2030, and also considered other SADC sector strategies with funding allocated to the main activities. This information was then passed on to the member states, who also were then able to indicate what were the activities that were undertaking in terms of the core activities and what were the sub-activities, and then come up with the cost estimates for each of these activities. There were a number of key assumptions that were used to do the costing. First of all, the cost estimates were based on US dollar values. And also it was assumed that these were aligned to the regional coordination activities. And also a weighted factor was used to average out unit costs, where we had a number of activities that were being undertaken, where, for example, you had consultants coming up under different classes. At the end of the day, it was agreed that we'd have one average cost that would be used, not to break down according to the level of expertise of the consultants. In the case of workshops, it was also assumed that these events would largely be physical events and that we would not have virtual engagements. This is obviously a worst case scenario in terms of costing. If we do have hybrid events or events that are virtual, it will then mean that these will cost less. It was also assumed that most of the activities will be undertaken at the member state level, and that the SADC Secretariat will be responsible for organizing and hosting regional events, and also that we would have short-term actions that fall within the broader sets of activities, such as facilitation, coordination, monitoring, reporting, resource mobilization, TA, advocacy, outreach, capacity building, development of tools and guidelines. I mean, these were broadly most of the activities when it came to regional coordination, as well as when it came to national coordination activities. The annual cost estimates were also adjusted to factor the realities in the member states' economies, i.e., if we're assuming that there'll be growth of the national economies, again, this was also used to factor the way the costs were arrived at. In terms of investment projects, the investment costs were based on the key regional and sectoral plans. And the selection of the regional projects was informed by these frameworks and reports, and I won't go through all of them. And I'm sure my colleague from the AFDB will also touch on some of the major infrastructure projects that are planned during this particular period. The subsectors for regional investments were based on a number of sectors or subsectors in the pillars: defense, agriculture, capital markets, transport, energy, water, etc., which were then looked at as the basis of the costings. The criteria for selecting the projects was based on the fact that the projects have been advanced and their commitments from member states, or that they are preparations that will be undertaken between 2020 up to 2030, i.e. there was some serious commitment on these projects, and that these projects would be implemented during this period. But of course, understanding that in some cases there will be a lot of planning that will be undertaken as part of the costings for these projects. The cost estimates and the year of completion is based on the reporting frameworks and submissions that were coming in from the member states. And again, it was also assumed that these regional projects are aligned to national priorities and also the identified sector corridors. Now, let me then just very briefly touch on the costing of the various elements. To start with, the total RISDP 2020-2030 regional coordination costs, excluding staff costs, we are looking at a figure of $413,463,280 US dollars. And the breakdown, according to the costs, is that 20% will go to the foundation pillar, peace, security, and good governance. And then the first pillar on industrial development and market integration will be about 33%. And also then we have the pillar on infrastructure taking 15% of the costs, and the third pillar on social and human capital taking 15.820228 million, 4% of the costs. And then the cross-cutting issues taking 25%. And lastly, the strategic management of the RISDP taking a 4% of the total cost. So this is how these regional costs have been arrived at for coordinating the implementation of the RISDP. In terms of the national coordination costs, again, as I've indicated, these are still work in progress, not yet finalized. We're talking a figure of 17 billion, which I think you all agree is quite high. And I'm sure that figure is going to be refined a little further once it's finalized, the costing which is being done by the member states. So 3% is allocated to the peace, security, and good governance pillar, and 8% goes to the pillar number 1 on the IDT, industrial development and market integration. Then pillar 2 infrastructure takes 56%, and 22% pillar 3, and then 11% on cross-cutting issues, and 0.2% on strategic management of the RISDP. I am sure there are costs that have been allocated under pillar 2 infrastructure, which will probably move across to the regional investment costs, and as such would then see a significant reduction of the projected national coordination costs. But this is still work in progress. And then the last area of costing is on the regional investment costs, and the total projected cost is 57 billion US dollars, and you can see it's quite a significant figure given the very nature of these activities or projects that will be implemented, with a bulk allocated to the second pillar, infrastructure, and then followed by the first pillar on industrial development and market integration, and then we have the cross-cutting issues, and then the third pillar on social human capital development. Colleagues, this in brief is the presentation that I thought I could share with you on the costing of the RISDP. As I've indicated, the regional coordination costs, those have been finalized. What is still outstanding are the national coordination costs and also the regional investment costs. The importance of this exercise is clearly that member states are able to articulate what it costs for them to implement the undertaking that they have made to implement the RISDP. And within these costs that have been put together, there are activities that have been earmarked, activities out of which then member states are then able to indicate the costs that are associated with implementation of these activities. It therefore then provides a basis of approaching funders, potential funders, who can then partner with member states to fund these activities. And I think the way this exercise has been undertaken provides a good basis for member states and partners to understand the costs associated with implementation of the RISDP, and therefore form a basis of engagement, a basis of developing projects that then get costed. And I'm sure this workshop that you have, this meeting that you have, will also then provide a good understanding of how the region can approach resource mobilization based on a good appreciation of what it is that is going to be implemented and the associated costs. I hope my presentation will be able to give you that appreciation and form also a foundation of carrying through the activities of building the capacities of resource mobilization to be able to fund successfully our implementation of the RISDP 2020-2030. I thank you.
But colleagues and excellencies, don't worry. If you have questions, please do use the chat function or the question and answer function. Dennis is here. He actually worked and he continues to work closely with Daniel on the costing exercise. So he will be able to take questions on behalf of Daniel as well. The real question is, where is the money? Where are the funding sources to support these costs in country, regionally, and globally? Where are these funding sources? Secondly, what strategies are we likely to use to access and mobilize these resources? In fundraising, we usually talk about raising friends before raising funds. Secondly, we talk about fundraising as the gentle art of teaching people the joy of giving. Are we at that stage where we are able to share strategies, instruments, and approaches that can be used by our different member states in order to raise the resources that are needed? But I also want to say that we also normally think of resource mobilization as the right person asking the right prospective donor or investor for the right reason, at the right time, in the right way. So we shift gears a bit now to having presentations that are going to help us understand how we can raise these resources. So next, I want to introduce Dr. Lufeo Banda, a national of Zambia. He earned his PhD in economics from the University of Cape Town in South Africa in 2010. He is a development economist. He has previously worked in Washington, DC at the World Bank, IMF, as a scholar and a relationship manager in the corporate division of the Standard Chartered Bank, and as a finance expert at the SADC Secretariat. In fact, Lufeo was heavily involved in the production of the resource mobilization strategy. He is currently a Chief Regional Operations Officer in the Regional Integration Department, assisting the African Development Bank with implementation of regional infrastructure and industrial projects, the authorization of the SADC Regional Indicative Fund, among others. So let me welcome Dr. Lufeo Banda to take us through some of the existing instruments that can be utilized to finance mega projects in Africa, in particular from the infrastructure perspective. Over to you, Lufeo.
Thank you, Dr. Moyo. And I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, I confirm.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this meeting and share with you some perspective on how SADC can implement a mega project by mobilizing adequate resources. Basically, my presentation will follow the following. Okay. The following will be my key outline of the presentation. I'll briefly look at the background. I'll look at the sources of funding for infrastructure. I'll look also at the principles of infrastructure which are underlined. And I'll also look at the options of financing instruments, potential sources for transport, including other infrastructure projects, and how SADC can mobilize resources for RISDP and regional commitments. And I'll end my presentation with a little bit of some anecdotes in terms of the case studies, and there will be two. Then I'll conclude based on that. I'm using, I think, a little bit of outdated data. However, I think I understand that there's about 75.2 billion worth of resources required to implement, I think, SADC projects. However, these resources which are recognized here are from the previous stamp, which was developed by Sadiq, and I think it informed exactly to say, look, in terms of transport, we had about 16.7 billion of resources which were required. Energy, we had about 12 billion. ICT, we had after about 21 billion, and water, it was about 13 billion. Collectively, those amounts were coming to about 64 billion and translating into 12 billion worth of resources which were required every year for 5 years. And if you ask me, have we performed well? The answer is no, we haven't performed well. In terms of the sources of these resources, where do they come from? ICA has done, and in fact, where I come from, the bank, I think we have been doing a little bit of some, introspect in terms of who is financing the projects. Basically, I think most of the resources come from the national governments, and that is fiscus. A little bit of more resources also come from developing partners like EU, Germany, UK, USA, you name it. Other resources also come from multilateral institutions such as African Development Bank, World Bank, European Investment Bank, FW, to name at least a bit. And we've also, the biggest elephant in the room, China has been, rising and I think contributing more to infrastructure project development. And we have got also the private sector, which has not been performing well. However, it has huge resources in terms of, I think, contributing to infrastructure financing. Allow me also at the same time to look briefly or talk briefly about, the principles of infrastructure financing, because it's not just financing for the sake of financing. The first principle is public or government financing, government financing. Public sector lending, these resources are in public sector lending, grants, subsidies, guarantees, indebtedness, may be least expensive resources you may ever get, because the money is coming from the government and at times it comes from the taxes. So it's a little bit cheaper in terms of mobilizing. Then we've got also corporate financing. This is financing to the project company or sponsor company against proven credit risk and ongoing business. And that is the fundamental underlying the corporate financing. We've also got project financing, which is limited or no recourse financing to SPVs or companies, and SPV relying primarily on future cash flows for the project for repayment. More expensive than government financing, but off balance sheet, which could be very good in this era of COVID pandemic and floods and the like, where the government might not have adequate resources. If we are looking to alternative resources, this could be one of them. Private financing may employ corporate and project financing to provide equity, quasi-equity, shareholding, and subordinated loans, grants, etc. to develop projects. And we've got blended financing, which normally uses the grants to leverage more resources from private sector or risk resources. So this is fundamentally the principle underlying the financing of the infrastructure. And just to tease it a little bit, when we are looking at public financing, what does it mean? The government borrows funds to finance an infrastructure project and gives a sovereign guarantee to lenders to repay all the funds. Government may contribute its own equity in addition to the borrowed funds, which is ideal because definitely we are not just going to give the money to the government for the sake of giving it. There should be some guarantees that the government is going to pay. And the government, for your own information, is the best instrument or institution we can lend to, because normally when we lend to the government, it's almost like risk-free, irrespective of which government is there, or even if the government are to fall, another government will rise, and I think that debt will have to be repaid. And that's why the treasury bills, which are issued by the central banks, are risk-free instruments. Lenders also analyze government's total ability to raise funds through taxation and in general public enterprise revenue, including new tariffs. Allow me at this juncture just to point out one thing. Key to this when we are assessing the government does not only end at looking at these issues. We also go to IMF, its multilateral institution, to obtain a letter of comfort. Is the government, in terms of macro fundamental, performing well? Can it be sustained? Does it have adequate import covers? These are issues we look at globally because we are a developing financial institution. If I'm talking about MDBs, then the sovereign guarantees show up as a liability of government lists to financial obligation, which is also critical. Whatever the government guarantees, that is not just a guarantee. It becomes an obligation under which the government owe a liability. And briefly there, I've outlined exactly how the flow of resources move and in. The government, which is at the center, borrows the resources, let's say from the private sector or from the multilateral institution, and they are supposed to repay those resources. However, the government is not going to implement the project. The implementation of the project could be given to the private sector firm. And that private sector firm may develop, let's say, maybe a water treatment plant and, or a road, and from there the government will collect the taxes. So be rest assured, each time when you're using a road, you are drinking water, we pay taxes to the government, and those taxes, they go to payment of some of these things like infrastructure projects. Corporate finance, what does it entail? Here, a company borrows funds to construct infrastructure and guarantees to repay lenders from its available operating income and its base of assets. The company may choose to contribute its own equity because definitely it wants to borrow. And in performing credit analysis, lenders such as MDBs look at the company's total income from operations, its stocks, assets, and its existing liabilities. That is very critical because we want to find out if this institution or is it company proven enough that it can return the resources. If it is, then definitely we will look more generously and provide the resources. The next component we normally look at is the project structure and financing. Here, a consortium of private firms may establish a new project company, an SPV, for instance, to build on and operate specific infrastructure projects. The new project company is capitalized with equity contribution, and I will demonstrate this as I will give an example in my closing remarks. The project company then borrows funds from the lenders. The lenders look to the project future revenue stream to generate by the project and project company assets to repay all the loans. The host country may provide guarantees or may not provide guarantees. And I will demonstrate this again in the case of N4 project, which was developed in South Africa. Then we've got private financial structure. What does it entail? Project sponsors are often entering into collaborative structures with government, may implement infrastructure projects through corporate and project financing tools, and also providing equity, quasi-equity grants, debt in cash and in kind, subordinated debt, or shareholders' debt, and others. The project sponsor, prior to providing any of the aforementioned financial financing products to implement the project, would have executed relevant agreements with the government. And this we can see it also in the case of Gauteng, roads which were developed. There were some agreements which were agreed upon, and I think those are long-term agreements. In terms of the infrastructure financing versus funding, I would like to mention two things here. There is a clear distinction here. When we talk about infrastructure funding and infrastructure financing, they are two different things. Infrastructure funding refers to broadly to revenue sources, often collected over a span of many years, which are used to pay the cost of providing infrastructure services. Common sources of infrastructure funding include, for instance, general purpose tax revenue, revenue from from user charges, such as tariffs, other charges or fees dedicated to infrastructure, e.g., transfer revenue from the government. Infrastructure financing, on the other hand, by contract, turns these revenues into capital or development of infrastructure. And common sources of infrastructure funding include concession financing, which could be coming from the MDBs, commercial financing, grants also. And thus, and this is the caveat, unless infrastructure funding issue is addressed, the financing option will continue to be limited in nature. And this is very critical because definitely we'll have to sort out that. So the previous slide, which I mentioned, I think just is buttressed by this, where we're looking at funding sources and we're looking at repayable financing options, which normally leads for us to create, the infrastructure we are talking about. And I will not belabor much to talk about that. In terms of, I think, the instruments, allow me to mention, I think, a few couple of issues here. When we are looking at developing financial institutions, they provide concessional loans. We provide technical assistance. And sorry for me to interchange in that word because maybe I'm coming from a multilateral institution. That's why I'm saying we. But basically, the developing financial institutions, multilateral institutions, they develop concessional loans, which is long term. At times when they give a loan, that loan could be maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years for it to be repaid. But at the same time, it's very cheap. It's not at the market rate. And we also offer what we might call technical assistance. This technical assistance is to enable the member countries who are implementing infrastructure to ensure that they understand and they've got enough capacity to move forward with the implementation of the projects. And in terms of the instruments, these could be in terms of loans, in more favorable terms compared to other sources, important but insufficient. Insufficient in the sense that I think the multilateral institution also belabor in terms of mobilizing those resources. Then we have got commercial banks. These could provide working capital, commercial lending, short or long term. However, it's very short in most cases. And when we say long term, in most cases, it goes up to 1 year. And most of these resources, allow me to say, like I mentioned earlier, this money normally goes to the government if the government is issuing too many or too much of the treasury bills, because treasury bills are risk-free. And you may find because of the shortness or short nature under which commercial banks trade with the deposits, whereby they are using the law of large numbers, it becomes very difficult for them to lend long, let's say maybe for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because definitely they will be run down of the bank. And it's difficult to access these resources in most cases for long term. Then we've got what we might call financial markets. In Africa and in SADC in particular, most of them, they are embryonic. But this is where we can raise fixed income. We can use fixed income instruments to raise more resources, and we can use sales of shares to raise more instruments. Difficult to access if the country do not have developed financial markets, which is the case in SADC region, maybe for South Africa with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is pretty much better. Other sources, these are customer advance credit from suppliers. Credit from suppliers may only cover financing for specific investment. And as you can see on my right-hand side, I've mentioned to say financing project or infrastructure assets have to repay this in obligation. However, the biggest elephant in the room is the government, where we get transfers by the government, and important but not sustainable in terms of getting more of these resources. Project or infrastructure asset does not have to pay these amounts of money in many respects. Allow me now to move on to another instrument, which was even mentioned by Dr. Moyo, where we were talking about the private partnership. This is very critical. And according to the IMF World Bank, PPPs refer to arrangements where the private sector supplies infrastructure assets and services that traditionally have been provided by the government. What is the biggest difference here? The biggest difference here is when the risk is owned 100% by the government and the government develop that infrastructure, you find that that infrastructure is purely public. However, when you go to the other extreme, whereby the project is purely owned by the public, by the private sector, and the risk is all embedded within the private sector, then that project is private. In between, and as you are moving towards the private sector component, you find that we have PPPs. That is where the risk is being apportioned more to the private sector. And I think that is good because private sector, they are more, I think, agile, and I think they are able to think outside the box. And to buttress this point, the second slide talks to this issue of how is the allocation of risk in terms of sharing, where you can see on the top, you have got where you design, build, the contractor builds, and everything is done and the risk is borne by the government. That is almost purely public. But when you come down where you have more or less pushed the risk away from the public, then definitely that becomes more public-private partnership. And I think you are more or less moving to whether you are selling the entire asset. So those are the few dynamics you can adopt to. But what makes this be a little bit more, much better? PPPs have been known to 180% on time in terms of completion of the project and on budget. However, when you're looking at conventional way of preparing the project and developing the project, they are on time 30%. On budget, it's less than 10%. That in itself, the distinction is what allows many people to go the route of PPPs to ensure that at least they can tap into efficiency aspect of implementing the project. In terms of SADC, and I want to drill down a little bit on this. What are the key challenges of SADC mobilizing resources for these infrastructure projects we have been talking about? And I think as I was listening to the previous speaker, it reminded me of one thing, which is a little bit sad, but I think it's something which is not insurmountable. And I think SADC needs to rise to the occasion and look at the figures which have been presented by the previous speaker to be, I think, a challenge, but a challenge I think which we can win within the SADC region. First and foremost, poor macroeconomic fundamentals. Due to COVID and other, other issues, you find that at least SADC has not been doing well. I think some countries have overborrowed and they cannot even go to the market. Countries which were able to go to the market at one particular point in time, they went to those markets, I think, without really thinking too much about exactly what they were getting into. And even in the negotiations, they never negotiated properly. And I think when they came out, I think that impacted badly on their macro fundamentals. Inflation could be very high, issues to do with the debt to GDP very high, all those things I think have impacted on this. And I think we can see some of the countries, I think they are almost in debt, and I think whereby they cannot pay. Second is lack of project preparation facility instruments. Yes, we've got SADC project preparation facility, which is being hosted by BBSA, but let's be honest. If we are going to talk about infrastructure or regional investment of 57 billion, according to World Bank study, it articulates that 10% of that amount should be for project preparation. So by all means, if we are talking about 57 billion, then we're talking about almost 5.7 billion to be, the money we should be allocating to project preparation facility. But let's look at our project preparation facility. How much is there? There is almost zero. We're talking about maybe 10 million, we're talking about 20 million. And what is that going to do? Nothing. And also at the same time, the project preparation facility is currently operating in Africa, and I did a study on that. They are very fragmented, embryonic, a study which was recommended by the G20, and it recommended that we should come up with the big fund. It was thrown out of the window. That is the way we could have gone to prepare most of these projects. But allow me just on this project preparation facility to mention one thing. One biggest challenge is when you are dealing with regional projects, they're not like national projects, whereby some minister can wake up and say, yes, we want to implement this project, and we are able to implement it. Regional projects, I think they have got their own dynamics. And I will throw an example here. Let's look at Kazungura Bridge. Kazungura Bridge was developed by Botswana and Zambia. What does it entail? Botswana may want to go and borrow market from AFDB. That is the bank. Zambia may want to borrow money from ADF. What does it imply? There are two instruments there. One instrument is saying you can borrow at market rate or almost market rate. The other one is saying is you can borrow at the very concession rate. What does it entail when you are building the common good? One country may feel undermined and may not want to move into that. So regional instruments, project preparation, they become very key. And lack of innovative financing instruments such as SPVs, infrastructure, and industrial bonds, this as a bigger problem, I think, or it creates a big roadblock in terms of how we implement the project. In the region, we don't have these instruments. And yet, I think, and I'll demonstrate assets under management, we have almost about 3 billion. You find that these resources, you cannot even talk about it, we cannot even mobilize them. However, I think that's where we should be moving to. Then there is also enduring capital markets. I've alluded to that, and I will not tell much at length and waste much more of my time to talk about it again. And also there is lack of proper regulatory policies for financial sector and non-banking. This is very critical because you find at times our capital markets, they will take all the resources we have and invest it in Europe. In
I'll
Europe,
ask
we're
you
going
to start lending, Banda.
Hello?
I'm saying I'll ask you to prepare to lend.
Yes. Okay. Then I'll move a little bit quick. Then you see all this, and there is also lack of land or the fund, which we should be able to move. Then, in terms of the resources, we have got huge resources in Sadiq. For instance, assets under management. We're talking about 300 billion or 500 billion within Africa, and within Sadiq, I think it would be over 300 billion. We could mobilize more resources from this, and yet our pension funds, they do not put money into the infrastructure projects. Then we have got a lot of resources from the pension funds, and I think we need to look at that and I think see exactly how these institutions can provide more resources. Now, allow me just to talk about, because Dr. Moyo has told me to land, I'll give you one example, and I think I will not belabor much to another example. And I'll bring one example. I will not talk to the toll road in Santiago, but I'll talk to the toll roads which was done, but they are very similar, which was done here in South Africa. This was the Maputo road. It was a 620 million N4 road between Mozambique and South Africa. And to ensure that this project was implemented, and you can read most of the things, the following is what was done. I'll go specific to this. An SPV was created, and there were sponsors, and these sponsors were Stocks Banks of France, and there were also non-sponsors who were in the name of South African Infrastructure Fund, to which African Development Bank puts a lot of money. There were also R&D, asset management, insurance, and pension funds. They also provided 60% equity. Once this was realized, they were able to go to the market and borrow from GFI, GBC, DBSA, commercial banks, pension funds, who were able to bring in the resources in terms of the loans which they wanted. And the two countries provided what I might call the guarantees, though they were not even necessary and they were not used. So you could see this has been very much a project which has worked. And I think each time when you are traveling on N4, you can, I think, be rest assured to say it was prepared using this type of a model, which Sadiq can replicate. What were the challenges for this? The project faced unique challenges because of its cross-border nature, as well as future traffic flows in Mozambique, which were not that good at that point. And based on this, they were accommodated in one or another by South Africa. And 35% of the total of the project cost fell due in Mozambique. However, these were accommodated through the innovative ways under which they went through this. There was a high level of political will. These were the key lessons. Two governments jointly guaranteed the SPV. Concession agreement included innovative solutions to focus subsidies, which was very critical because Mozambique would not afford at that point, but they were able to bring some resources from South African and cover those until Mozambique part was up and running. The regulatory framework in South Africa allowed the pension funds to invest in investment funds such as South African Investment Fund, and which subsequently also invested in this instrument. Internal risks such as political and regulatory were also de-risked by what the South African government did to ensure that at least they were able to move forward. In terms of, I think, these issues lessons, I think I will not belabor much. I think you can read them. I think I'll share the slides. The only point which I would like to mention at the end is that through these type of mechanisms, innovative financial instruments, I think you can go a long way to mobilize resources, I think, which could go a long way, I think, to fund this project we are talking about. But what will it take? Two things, and I think I'm moving away from the slide a little bit. Two things you must pay attention to. One, let's come up with the SADC Regional Development Fund. The SADC Regional Development Fund can create these innovative instruments, and they will enable the investment which have been alluded to the tune of 57.2 billion to be easily implemented. Chair, I think I've taken a little bit of time, but I think I stop here.
Thank you very much, Lufeo. I couldn't stop you because your presentation is so rich, and I think that for colleagues who are attending the workshop, but for those who will also be attending the training, will really benefit from the instruments that we have shared. And I'm aware that you will also join us when we actually do the training to dig deeper into some of these instruments and help participants and demonstrate how they can utilize them to access some of these funds. So thank you very much. With your permission, we'll be able to share your slides. I wasn't so sure because there's been so much request to share slides from speakers. So I'll be asking as each presenter does whether we can share your slide. We had not yet asked from speakers to share the slides, but certainly the recording will be available to everyone. So we are going to move swiftly into the next presentation, which will focus on how we can harness venture capital to finance some of the projects that have been presented. And I'm happy to be inviting Michelle, who is the founder and the director of A Capital Idea, a strategy consultancy firm that focuses on resource diversification, investor engagement, ESG, and impact investing. Michelle has worked previously as a financial journalist with the Financial Times, after which she moved to venture capital and subsequently joined the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Michelle is also a sessional lecturer at WBS for CAPSI modules, particularly focusing on our venture philanthropy offerings. Michelle, I will also invite you to take at least 20 minutes or less if you can. Please, over to you.
Good. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. I must say that everything that colleagues have been sharing so far today has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm certainly looking forward to playing a part in the upcoming training and core modules that we're going to be doing. So mine is to focus on targeting venture capital specifically for the financing of regional projects. I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to be talking about venture capital activity on the continent, just to provide a regional overview. Closely related, I thought it was relevant to look at impact investing activity, because certainly that would be a funder group and to be considered for a very broad range of projects, possibly much broader than one would anticipate, including infrastructural projects. I'm going to look at the infrastructure investment paradox, and talk a little bit about that, and then the bulk of my presentation, I think, will be spent on solving for underinvestment, specifically in infrastructure in the venture capital field. So then to start, venture capital deals in 2021 on the continent made up a combined total value of $5.2 billion, which is a record-breaking year by volume and value. So this is in total, and I'm now talking about the broad gambit of venture capital on the continent. It certainly was a strong year. Value equaled that invested in the preceding year, 7 years combined by venture capitalists on the continent. It underscores two things. First of all, the industry's maturation on the continent, but secondly, the pace of investment. I mean, the acceleration is unparalleled globally. So to look at the year by numbers, just in terms of venture capital highlights, 604 unique companies participated as investors or as funders of venture capitalists. The investment stage that grew most was late stage deals. The sector focus, as one would anticipate, the vast majority of the deals were in technology or technology-enabled companies. There were 16 supersized deals, which is really of interest to those of us focusing on integration or infrastructure projects. And 4 of the African tech startups that were funded reached valuations of over $1 billion. So they were the so-called unicorns. So if you look at the percentage of deal volume and value by ticket size, we'll note that the $50 million plus category certainly gained the majority of the investment. Then to think about impact investing, and the reason that I'm doing this is because the two overlap, as we would be aware, but for those of us who are focused on targeting alternative and possibly innovative funding mechanisms or structures for our projects, even the very large projects. It certainly would be worthwhile considering impact investors and targeting them specifically. So there are more than 167 private impact investing companies. One would be aware that it's a whole lot smaller, going to be a whole lot smaller in terms of numbers of funds out there than venture capitalists. It's the total assets under management among the top 50 fund managers jumped considerably in 2020. There's been a huge amount of growth with 52% of those currently investing planning to increase their Africa exposure in the next 5 years. Now, what I'd like to focus on is the degree to which the SADC region attracts funding. Certainly, the bulk of the funding allocated to the region, as well as additional, as the highest level of enthusiasm about increasing that level of investment. Now, why talk about that? Well, I'll get to that in just a moment. So there's a spectrum that we obviously are aware of when we're thinking about looking at attracting impact investors or those that are focusing on doing on social good, with traditional grant making on the one side being a social impact purely focused investment, and then I guess on the other side, impact investing with impact, but also looking for a financial return. The ESG environmental, social, and governance compliant traditional businesses are often in this area. The interesting point and the conundrum that's alluded to, and that was alluded to by also by the very fascinating presentation of the previous speaker, is that the private sector is under-invested in infrastructure and has a particularly poor track record when it comes to closing deals on the continent, despite the investment, the infrastructure investment opportunities increasing steadily over the last 15 years. International investors have got the appetite and the funds, but the track record in moving projects to financial close is poor, with 80% of the infrastructure projects that were included in a McKinsey survey failing at the feasibility and business plan stage. So, there's the insufficient spending is really a result of the fact that despite that there's the need for funding, there's the availability of funding, and there's the pipeline of potential projects that, as I've mentioned, the drop-off rate of funding first at the feasibility stage, where 80% of those brought to investors drop off at that point, but then in the negotiation period between and before financial close, a further 10% failed to be approved. So the reasons cited, and now let's focus specifically on revenue diversification, which is really the focus of the upcoming training modules. The volume of infrastructure and integration projects with private sector participation have really shown significant decline, despite the fact that in total there's been an increase. The private sector participation has shown significant decline following the commodity price bust after the boom. And what's really required is a rebuilding of private sector financing sources in economic development. That's our requirement from the continent. And so the question would be, for those of us who are out there pitching for projects and actually looking for alternative funding mechanisms, what is it that we should be doing or saying that is different to what we're currently doing? So though we tend in our proposals and our pitches still to be talking about I guess the standard investment thesis elements that that investors have come to expect about the young and growing population, abundant natural resources, all of which is of course entirely valid and extremely important, but frequently doesn't answer. And this is often where where my role comes in advising clients. Frequently, the kind of pitches and the kinds of proposals that we're putting together to offer to the private sector, whether it's venture capital or impact investing or other, we are we are giving insufficient attention to issues, whether perceived or actual, in project risk, looking at assessment risk, upfront costs versus return periods, etc. Insufficient mitigation strategies being put into place, or at least rather being talked about when it comes to managing for currency risk, etc. And specifically, very minimal attention in terms of in the eyes, this is a perceived issue, of course, in the eyes of many of the private sector investors who I communicate with in terms of talking through exit risk, particularly when there's a listed equity element, and making use of the SADC stock exchanges. So with all of this in mind, looking at targeting venture capital with projects for which we are seeking diversified funding, presents a strong alternative. It's the availability of funding, but it's also the time is right for this, and let's just talk about a couple of the reasons. So in terms of investors coming into the market, there are a few reasons why they would struggle to why international institutional investors would struggle to come into the capital markets through the stock exchanges, through equity investments. Currently the ratings versus the risk are seen as presenting limited attraction, and then there are other issues which we will talk about in subsequent slides, that limit attraction in the listed equity environment in the SADC region, but on the other hand, there's real focus by investors. Pension funds, for example, increasingly demand sustainable investing strategies from asset managers. The SDGs are seen as something which is still the SDG benefits and elements are still not seen as being entirely voiced or in the pitches and the proposals that private sector funders are seeing, but nonetheless they certainly are seen as important, and with the result that impact investing is now occupying a bigger share of the market. COVID certainly prompted a focus on businesses providing essential services, and it's also and then there's an exponential growth in demand for ESG investment options. Now these are different subsets of these factors will be good for venture capital investment into seed profit-driven projects and infrastructural projects on the continent, but certainly they should be borne in mind when it comes to putting together proposals that are targeting a private sector investor. If we look at aiming to solve for underinvestment, and we're thinking about the private sector mechanisms, the growth and the pent-up growth of infrastructure funds being run frequently out of South Africa, being run by the traditional the pension funds and asset managers, there is significant. I was in communication with the old mutual investor infrastructure fund heads who were saying, you know, the funding is there. It's asset manager monitored. It facilitates cash flows transfers to create and in terms of creating the fund, but then in terms of the investments that are made. The infrastructure funds are frequently used to finance ground transportation networks, telecommunication infrastructure networks, and even airports and seaports. What we require would be a move to prompt the growth of the number and scope of these funds, but from the perspective of those of us who are out looking for funding, these are certainly funds that we should be and could be considering. In terms of capital market development, looking for even looking for venture capital funding of an unlisted project, or it's nonetheless the development that is required in our region's capital markets even provides is constraining the interest of the venture capital sector into the market, with technological constraints being a concern, or varying numbers or ranges of intermediaries playing in the market. So some of these factors are, of course, outside of our control as those of us who are putting together projects and pitching them to investors. But to be aware of these is important. The lack of liquidity posing a barrier to investment in securities, and prompting an exit risk, therefore, of unlisted projects through use of the stock markets and the listed equity environment. In terms of solving for underinvestment through project level proposal amendments that need to be made, awareness is required for those of us in the space of the investment criteria of the venture capitalists that we're looking at. Now, this might sound patently obvious, but it's quite notable how there's a mismatch very frequently in the proposals that are received between the particular venture capitalist mandate and investment criteria and interests, and the kind of the wording and the structuring of the proposal being received, where it's possible to pitch that exact same project using slightly different language, or using amendments of metrics, etc., to target the same venture capital outfit for funding. A persuasive impact investment thesis, we are inclined to either stray on the side of using a lot of adjectives, or of using metrics without the persuasive kind of text and argument that goes around it. We need to marry the two, looking at the return of investment substantiated by material empirical data and realistic costings. As I've mentioned previously, attention to boosting SDG factors and those that are boosted by the particular project. There's the recognition and addressing of risk factors is something that is often underplayed. So while on the one hand there's a lack of attention to the mitigation factors, there's also insufficient attention to what exactly are the benefits of the project, and what what the impact that could be made. Measuring, quantifying, and demonstrating impact. So I feel like I'm speaking to an esteemed group of people about things that are fairly basic, but it is nonetheless demonstrable that these are the very factors that are standing in the way of many of our extremely valuable and projects being turned away by the funders that we are targeting. Our proposals could also increase the the recognition paid to blended finance as a fundraising avenue, and spending sufficient time and resources structuring the initial transaction and offering so that we, in order to make the infrastructure project investable by mainstream capital, and noting that sub-Saharan Africa, as we know, is targeted in particular for blended finance transactions. That, in a very short nutshell, is what my offering for today. And Professor Moyo, thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to learning from all the input of colleagues today, and communicating with delegates attending the courses in the upcoming months.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. And I know that you will also be going deeper into some of these instruments when we conduct the training. And now for the last presentation, but not the least, I welcome Robson Chakwana. We introduced him earlier, but he has more than 15 years of experience in management and extensive hands-on experience and expertise in working with the public and private sector institutions, both at national and regional level. Robson also has 5 years experience in managing multi-donor projects, including co-financing programs between the EU and German Development Cooperation. Robson is going to be talking to us about the role that international cooperating partners play in resourcing the regional integration agenda. Over to you, Robson.
Yeah, and the video. Thank you very much. Can I be seeing the presentation? Can you see the presentation? Can I confirm that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. My presentation is to talk about the role of the ICP in SADC regional integration agenda. And what I'm going to draw on is the fact that this is a presentation that has drawn quite a lot of information from what's happening in SADC Secretariat as the key institution that is facilitating and leading the implementation of SADC integration agenda. But I will also connect my presentation to the background why this program is with us, supporting the member states, and also bringing in various institutions to work together to try and implement a SADC regional integration agenda. This comes from the realization that there is a lot of gaps between policy making at the regional level and the actual implementation in the member states. And there are several factors to this. Some of the factors are that there is low awareness of SADC benefits among national stakeholders across the region. There is also weak alignment of national and regional plans, the absence of coordinating structures at the national level where they are supposed to be coordinating the implementation of SADC integration agenda. Weak collaboration between national coordinating structures, as well as the planning and budgeting entities. ICP support not well aligned with the SADC integration agenda at national level, but also the limited involvement of non-state actors in the implementation of SADC regional integration agenda, as well as multiple commitments that national governments have towards several regional economic activities. As a result of this, the issue has been that the linkages have been weak, and therefore the implementation hasn't been very good. As a result of this, SNRL, Strengthening Regional, National Regional Linkages Program, was put together by the commissioning parties. This is German Development Corporation, the EU, as well as the SADC Secretariat as the main implementer, to have an objective that the member states must be supported so that the goal will be reached of accelerating progress towards implementation of the SADC agenda. And the specific objective is to enhance the capacity of SADC member states structures to facilitate and coordinate the implementation of the regional agenda at country level. This is being achieved in focusing 3 broad areas. The first area is coordination, and that is supporting member state structures to be established or strengthened according to the provision of the SADC Treaty. And the second broad area is issues of planning and monitoring to ensure that capacities are being built to enhance the implementation and also monitoring of the revised RISDP and SADC priorities. And another aspect is the whole aspect of sustainability, which is what is bringing us together today to build capacities for member states so that they are able to mobilize resources for the implementation of the agenda. So the way SNRL is doing this under resource mobilization is that it is providing support for capacity building to member states by building the capacity of staff to have skills and competences for mainstreaming regional integration commitment in their day-to-day work, but also providing support on the capacity building for those coordination structures to have budgets, national budgets, institutional budgets on its SADC integration agenda so that they are able to carry out their mandates, but also building capacities to ensure regional agenda is reflected in the member states' budget at global national level, and for the implementation and the use of the public funding. But the program also is providing support to member state structures to try and have capacity to tap into external resources for the implementation of regional integration agenda. So we are providing this particular information to you at this point in time that SADC integration agenda have a number of sources. And I think as already explained by my previous colleagues, SADC regional integration agenda is financed from member states' contribution to the SADC Secretariat, but also their own projects at the national level. There's financial and technical support coming from various ICPs that are supporting or have been supporting SADC since and until today. And also the contribution coming from other regional, continental, and global agencies such as UN agency and sometimes the AU, and also providing some support that comes from private sector funding, especially in case of investment projects. So the role of the international cooperating partners in SADC, these partnerships that are there between SADC and the ICPs are targeting at providing support and funding to the SADC Vision 2050, SADC Regional Indicative Plan 2030 to 2030, and also towards SADC priority protocols and other instruments, as well as the mega projects, infrastructure projects. I think a very good example is the Kazungula bridge between Zambia and Botswana. Their guiding frameworks as provided for in the SADC setup for providing support from the ICPs. And these guiding frameworks are, number one, the SADC Treaty itself, Article 14, already provides for the mandate of the SADC to mobilize resources from the ICPs for implementation of SADC programs and projects. Another guiding framework is the famous Windhoek Declaration, which was approved in 2006, and it also provides principles and also structures for engaging international cooperating partners towards priorities of SADC. Another guiding framework is the resource mobilization strategy that SADC developed and was approved in 2012, and it outlines the guiding principles and pillars for effective resource mobilization. Another one is SADC Regional Development Fund, which outlines regional financial mechanism to mobilize resources from member states and international cooperating partners and the private sector, again, for purposes of regional development and deepening regional integration. And also another one is the SADC Regional Resource Mobilization Framework, approved in 2019, and it establishes alternative and innovative sources of funding to enhance sustainable financing of regional programs. Another one is SADC Financial Regulations 2012, and also the draft SADC Resource Allocation Framework, which has just been presented and approved by the Council in 2022 in March. What is the landscape of available ICPs supporting SADC regional integration agenda in general and globally? We have in SADC, the European Union, which is the lead partner for providing resources for SADC, German Development Cooperation, implemented through GIZ and KfW, the support from France, China, and UK through DFID, Danish Development Agency, Swedish Development Corporation, Swiss Development Corporation, Australian Development Agency, USAID, Japan, SIDA, Canada, USAID, World Bank, African Development Bank, UNECA, and Dutch Aid. The trend at the moment, which I would like to share with you, is as follows. From 2019 to 2023, the SADC member states' contribution has been steadily increasing, as you can see from figures from 55.5 million in 2019 to 74 million US dollars, slightly over 74 million US dollars in today's or this year's 2022-2023 budget. And then the ICP's contribution is 30 million in 2019-2020, and has moved to 35,504,442 in 2022-2023 budget. So you can see that there's been an increase of support from the ICPs, but the picture shows that from this trend, member states and the ICP allocation account to 30% of the total annual budget, but also to indicate that 80% of this is really the support that is coming from the EU, and the remaining 20% is being contributed by Germany, AFDB, Swiss Development Corporation, Southern Africa Trust, and the World Bank. Yes. And this trend is largely being informed by various sources of support from the EU 11th EDF that were signed between 2018 and 2019, and the trade-related facility of the 10th EDF programs that is now at the final stages of implementation. So whilst the EU remains a key ICP over the past 3 years, the composition and the volume of support from the other ICPs have also varied over the years. No, it's not. Just need to, please just put an X there. Sorry, my computer seems to have frozen a little bit. Yeah. Thank you very much for your patience. Risks and implications of the ICP reduction of resources to SADC Secretariat. The substantial volume of the budget coming from ICPs, 30%, as I mentioned, is particularly from EU. But there are developments that are coming on board, and such as the evolving development cooperation architecture in the context of the EU. Maybe some of you have heard about the new neighborhood development and international cooperation instruments, NDICI, which does not foresee a continued direct allocation of resources to regional economic communities, including SADC, but rather EU plans to promote direct management of the development cooperation. This anticipated discontinuation of the direct resources to RECs like SADC will obviously present a financial shock to regional economic communities, including SADC. Although program support may continue through the other channels, which is direct implementation, the financial impact is obviously inevitable. And this will affect the implementation of the RISDP 2020-2030, which at least by 2025, it will be at the midway of its implementation. And it is also the same period that coincides with the final conclusion of the most EDF programs and the resources that are available for SADC regional integration projects and programs. Of course, the impact of COVID across SADC economies in the region will also affect contribution of the member states and thereby affecting the overall available resources for SADC programs. And of course, the donor conditionalities, which increasingly are evolving and sometimes affecting the final scope of the resource envelopes. As mitigation measures, the SADC Council of the meeting of 2019 already made decisions in trying to mitigate about this foreseeable impacts by approving the revised roadmap towards the full operationalization of the SADC Regional Development Fund in order to contribute to the SADC Regional Integration Agenda. However, as at February 2022, only 9 member states have signed the agreement, and no member states has yet ratified the agreement, which I think this is still one of the causes for the delays in realizing the full establishment of SADC Regional Development Fund. As you may know, it takes 2/3 of the SADC membership for an instrument to be ratified, and then the subsequent activities for that institution could take place. And continuation to that, the SADC Council again made a decision in 2019 in approving SADC Regional Resource Mobilization Framework with the following key recommendation on components of mobilizing the resources. Component number 1 is the alternative sources of financing, which provides an a la carte option where member states are free to choose their own way of generating revenue to finance SADC programs, including the possibility of contributing to the regional programs and projects through their fiscus. And these options are the implementation of tourism levy, import levy, export levy, transport levy, financial transaction taxes on international payment transactions, philanthropy, regional Rotary, regional special events, and the curbing of illicit financial flows. And component number 2 is the innovative sources of funding, suggesting that member states must mobilize massive resources to finance energy projects and roads and other infrastructure projects using some of the following approaches, which I think my colleague Lufeo Banda also made a mention: market-based financial transactions, the issuing of bonds in the capital markets, securitization of insurances and pension funds, and blended finances and public-private partnership. And component number 3 continues to be the key sources of financing from the ICP, which currently is making 1/3 of the total financing of the regional integration agenda. And SADC continuously is undertaking to promote component number 3 in order to strengthen the diversification of the current ICP portfolio in accordance with the SADC resource mobilization strategy, including also exploring further cooperation partnerships with non-traditional international cooperating partners from the emerging markets. And to continue, also additional mitigation measure, again, is another council decision of August 2016, approving the roadmap towards the finalization of the SADC regional non-state actors engagement mechanism that facilitates positive partnership between SADC citizens and the government in the region. And this is also expected to contribute to the widening of the partnership for SADC regional integration agenda. And in concluding, obviously, what will still matter and define the levels and scope of financing to SADC regional integration agenda are always the issues of transparency in the use of resources from the ICPs. ICPs are increasingly demanding accountability through audits, progress report, policy coordination, the fiscal discipline, respect for human rights, and especially those ICPs from the OECD, global public goods, climate change, environmental issues, peace and security, as well as the protection of vulnerable groups such as women and children, and the fight against corruption. With this, I would like to thank you all. My presentation has come to an end, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chakwana, for the valuable contribution. And I think that what you have done is really to demonstrate the gaps that still exist, especially taking into account the needs and the requirements that were presented by both Dennis and Daniel, and the instruments that are available out there. And we see that component 1 and 2 are still outstanding in terms of the resource mobilization strategy. Yet these are the instruments or the components that stand the potential to finance the regional integration agenda. And I see that there are questions already asked by colleagues who are probably we're going to take those questions now. But I want to immediately invite my colleague, Jacob Martin, Professor Martin, who is the Deputy Director at CAPSI and an Associate Professor at the Business School, to facilitate the next session in terms of firstly serving as a discussant to some of the issues that have been raised, and then facilitating a discussion session. Over to you, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you, Becky, and presenters for what is arguably quite an exciting incident. Sorry, give me a moment. Yeah, sorry about that. I think the presenters have given us something to work with so much, especially given that we're using this particular session to test some of the ideas that are likely to be incorporated into the training, not likely, it's that are incorporated in the training, but more so to pick some brains, especially on the high level leaders in the SADC region, but also others that are involved in the type of things that we're grappling with, resource mobilization for regional integration agenda. I do not have a quote unquote presentation because my brief was to be part of the discussion. And the way I would want to do this is briefly to ask broad questions. Some may be specific to a couple, to specific presenters, but more than that, then invite the presenters to also, I think, as courtesy to those that have posted any specific questions on the chat, to respond to that, and then we'll also open others to be able to ask or even present their own views on certain aspects. So one of the things that, getting back to the type of questions that I would want to hear some reflections on, is around the questions of the use of taxation for the purposes of resourcing the regional integration agenda. And I say this because I think the last presentation, as well as Dr. Abanda's presentation, has presented some of the options for public financing. And when we talk about public financing, it's really money that comes from taxation. And the last presentation has also talked about some of the ways through which, or the 2019 council decision especially, has a lot of levies, and levies are essentially taxation. But one of the things that I want to hear from the discussants is whether, or the presenters rather, is whether a specific tax or levy that is geared towards the regional integration agenda cannot be a way of doing that, and can come from various stakeholders, especially those that are invested in the transborder initiatives. When you look at Kasungura and you look at N4 and many of those, there are many actors that depend almost directly on that particular road. Is it possible that, especially within the business sector, that a specific levy could be generated to cater for that? I want to hear some reflections on that particular question. The other issue has to do with, Dr. Banda talked about the need for one, accommodation between member states, especially on transborder initiatives. The N4 is a big is a good example where he says some of the costs, or I mean, one of the countries did more heavy lifting, but we also live in a region where I think some of these things are not very sustainable, given the geopolitical dynamics, as it were. Yet, that particular competition is not as frequent in the way we do international relations, but the way we do development across nations. So what is it that can be done probably differently to ensure that this particular model works, and we see more examples of that, of successes in projects like N4, like Azungura, and many others. I think he has talked about the risks for each of these financing models. One of the things I'd want to hear a little bit more is one on philanthropy. And again, this will also touch on Mr. Chukwan's the presentation from Mr. Chukwana, the last one, because philanthropy has been identified as one of the ways through which resources could be mobilized. But I think the other presenters haven't talked much about the role of philanthropy in that regard, and probably this may also touch on what Michelle has been presenting. To hear, besides the social, the impact investing, philanthropy, what role can it play? Is there a role, for instance, in not the mega projects, but sometimes if we have philanthropists coming together they probably might be able to even fund a mega project. Is that possible? And if so, in what form might that be able to take? That's another question I would want to hear. So I'll leave those for now to hear from the presenters what they may have to say with regards to these particular questions. I don't know who would want to go first. Oh, Mr. Banda, I hear you. I can see you speaking. So maybe you want to go first?
Yes, I can go first. Then I think I'll touch the issues, two issues, I think particularly. The issue of tax. Yeah. And can we leave maybe a tax on N4 specifically for funding other infrastructure? Meaning, I think moving, because currently there's a tax on N4. Because I think there are those toll gates, where people are paying substantially. For instance, when I came to Botswana, I used to pay roughly about 70 rands to go up to Pretoria. Currently, it's almost 200. So I think even the tax has been increasing. However, I'm glad to inform the audience here to say, I think the road has been spectacular, and I think it has served its purpose, and I think it's doing magnificently well. And I think I can see a lot of traffic also moving between, I think, Zambia, DRC, Congo, and South Africa using the same road. So that's what we are looking for, because we are looking at efficiency and the like. But can we use part of the resources from there and tax it and say, look, I think let's take it to another project? It can be done. I think there is nothing which stops the government from doing that. Because I think if the government was clear in its developmental agenda, then I think this could be one way through which they be saying there is a very successful project where we are able to mobilize millions, if not billions of the dollars. How best can we use part of these billions of the dollars to fund those other infrastructure projects? The issue or the challenge is there political will? Maybe the political will might not be there. But secondly, it's on the concession which has been signed with the government. When they were signing that agreement, what was contained within that? Did they take into account to say other projects could be developed based on the success of this project? If those issues could be unpacked, then definitely, or in the future, agreements could be going in based on the SPVs and PPPs. I think it could go a long way in terms of, I think, us moving forward. The other issue you have mentioned, and which is very critical, is the issue of, there are a lot of, issues of ladies within what Sadiq is talking about. Believe you me, I think that is not sustainable for one simple reason. And I'll state the facts why I feel strongly that it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable because I think we are just using, taxes where people are overtaxed, and I think eventually they might even rebel. They might say, look, I think we are overtaxed. I think the simple truth of the matter is Gauteng province. How many people are paying for that? there are very few people because a lot of people have boycotted. And the government of Gauteng, though I'm entering into a different plane of argument here, they are saying, look, leave them. I think maybe the municipality within Gauteng could pay off, that debt. So at least people could be freed up and, they will be able to do their own business. So there are different dynamics. And believe you me, from African perspective, we should not just borrow ideas for the sake of borrowing ideas. We should borrow ideas and customize them and see where they can work. Issues of PPPs did not start now. These are old things. USA used to experiment these in the 1880s. And yet, I think they have not completely dealt with this issue and focused on PPPs. Now, you also raised the issue, can we replicate some of these models like Kazungula? Yes, we can replicate initiatives such as Kazungula. But what is the bottom line to that? I think from the member states' point of view, we need to rise to the challenge. And I like what Mr. Chakwan has mentioned here. The issue Mr. Chakwan has mentioned are very fundamental. Issues to say, look, there's donor fatigue. The instruments we have been talking about, which Professor Moyo has tried to champion within SADC, are very critical, and those are the ones which are going to sustain SADC going forward. And I hope the scaling down of resources from the donors could open up our eyes. And if it means us moving in the right direction for that reason, I think so be it. And I think maybe we need to move into that direction. I submit.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you've touched on very critical elements with regards to the scaling or replication, as it were. I think I love the idea behind customization, because like you say, many of these, we live in geographies where we're probably quite taxed. And that has brought not just the fatigue, but also resistance, as in the case of Gauteng. One of the things I was curious about when it comes to customization is on the need for, when I'm talking about a special purpose tax, there is already taxation, but I think the idea behind, yes, the conditions behind those particular concessions, can we be able to expand? Because it's you find these PPPs, some people being given X number of years for to recoup their returns, but it's possible that within a very short time that money has already been recouped. So what happens to all these other monies? That can we be able to do similar things? I think that's an important element to it. So, and with that, I think other panelists may be able to, presenters may be able to chip in on the other questions that are raised. Thank you.
Jacob,
can I just maybe just one intervention on that for a minute or less?
Yeah, sure.
On the issue of recouping the money within a short period vis-a-vis the long period, there are dynamics with regard to risk there. The shorter the period, the more it's not going to be good enough for an investor who would want to move in and mobilize resources for such a project. So the longer the period, the better. So that's the gist of the matter which is there.
Thank you. You said there's a hand, Prof. Moyo?
No, I was saying there's a request that all panelists be on camera. I think it's for purposes of a round table.
Okay.
So if we could invite Robson, Dennis, Michelle to be on camera. Thank you.
Yes, Robson, I also see your hand is up. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to just compliment a little bit to the responses that have been provided by Lufeo Banda. I think he has been quite extensive. But also just to add that in the context of your question, all these levers indeed are already provided for in the SADC resource mobilization strategy. And the member states have agreed that it makes sense that this makes quite a fundamental shift in resourcing our programs of regional integration. But the question is a political will to implement even those financing mechanisms that have been mentioned. So it is quite important, I think, in the implementation of the regional agendas, that there's also a promotion and cautious creation to the key policy makers on the need to ensure that this is being implemented. I think one particular example of an emerging source is the question you posed, philanthropy. This is not common yet in Southern Africa, and I think even the understanding of this concept is still limited. And that is why we are trying to promote, from this program point of view, to look for institutions like, in this case, our partner, Wits, to try and provide more information, more skills, more competences to our practitioners in the member states. I think in this way, I think the story of giving and receiving can change the understanding and maybe take the direction also of thinking that regional integration agenda can be financed from these people who are willing to give from their resources. Thank you. Okay,
thank you very much. It's actually on the question of revenues. One of my immediate questions was, well, there seem to be quite a lot, but is there harmonization besides the political will to even implement the this? Is there harmonization of this so much so that we know someone or a SADC member country citizen is not having it too easy in one country, or an investor is not having it too easy, and may be able to play the other country because like they will say, okay, oh, South Africa is not charging us this and this and this. So I think an element of harmonization might be able to be able to address some of these. Of course, the idea is not to overtax people, but to ensure that at least there is something that goes into that. And I love the idea behind the philanthropy thing, simply because I think when you look at disaster philanthropy in this continent, the amount of resources that are raised in a very short time, sometimes it's mind-boggling. So is it possible to turn that particular energy, not to disasters, but to things that are more developmental? So these are the type of questions that we need to be grappling with. Thank you. I can see Michelle's hand is up, and let's hear what she has to say.
Thank you so much.
Can come back later. Yeah.
My input was around venture philanthropy, yeah. Just noting that yes, while it is small on the continent, it is growing, and with the advent of the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, which is, I think, a very powerful group for the growth of this area. There's a mechanism for organizations and projects looking for support that can happen through that platform. Now it sounds like I'm giving a free advert for the association, but in actual fact, with the advent of organizations like that, I think we can see the fact that in fact it's maturing on the continent as and there are players across the continent who I believe would be able to join forces in the way that you outline, and not simply just because there's a disaster, or I shouldn't say just, but but rather for a longer term, more consistent social impact program, which is what we are seeing actually in a number of the programs that are operating on the continent with success.
Okay, thank you. I think the question then is how does SADC as an institution, but also the member states, tap into that particular resource, moving this forward? But let's hear what others have to say as well. I think, Mr. Chikwana, you wanted to have a second bite of the pie at some point.
No, not at this point, because there's a comment in the chat box which I want to comment on. Yes, but please. Maybe we can leave her to this. There's a comment that somebody, Mr. Deng Choi, who is commenting that a country like South Sudan is in great need for a program like this. and perhaps it could help on the heritage sector or for peace and development. How can the state party benefit from this great resource mobilization? Perhaps as a way of responding to this question is that I think as a program, in terms of the approach, in terms of the focus, if this is part of the reason for asking to try and learn so that the lessons can be used for a country like Sudan, we can always collaborate directly. But the second aspect is that as a program which is funded through EU and German Development Cooperation, I'm sure there's scope also under East African Community, where Sudan, I think Southeast Sudan is now a member of that African Southeast Community. And perhaps we can make a recommendation that we can link up to share lessons with them. And then perhaps those lessons can help them to craft something like this or even better, so that the issue of resource mobilization is put on high agenda. We also have a sister program here, which specifically is looking at peace, security, and good governance in the Sadiq region. And again, it's being supported by German Development Cooperation. This could be part of sharing the lessons at a wider scale for East African community, perhaps to get something for South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I also see a few more comments in the Q&A. I think those that have questions, it's easier to have them in Q&A because the comment one is, or the chat one is quite lengthy. Maybe let's get into that so that we can hear some of the answers or responses, as it were. We have Michael, who says, what can be alternative platform for raising funds from industrial pioneering projects which some of us in governments try to structure, as clear as Michelle's presentation showed, that stock market capitalism is in the region are not optimal for such ventures. Oh, I can see Michelle, you typing, but probably for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for the question. Agreed that that this is a this is a challenge in the sense that the stock market valuations and ratings are not optimal. However, I think that that the first steps involving the venture capital that I was talking about, for example, for seed funding would probably be one route to access that kind of stability, so that it's that you need in order to be able to grow the if you're talking about a pioneering project, something that's just been started. So I think venture capital would work well, and I also think that there are a number of impact investors who one could point you to who are actively involved in this phase of a project's history or starting.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Dr. Banda.
Yes, I just wanted to buttress what Michelle has said and maybe take another cue to that. And I think it's two-pronged. The first one is, yes, our markets are embryonic, but I think there should be some interventions we can make under, let's say, maybe Sadiq Stock Exchange, under which we can create platforms. And those platforms could be maybe for SMEs or such kind of things, through which resources can be raised. These are deliberate policies. And I think, I know Johannesburg Stock Exchange has tried to move in that direction. It's high time we push that agenda forward, so at least maybe they can revitalize it and move in that direction. But secondly, and most importantly, it's for institutions like IDC, the bank I work for, to ensure that at least when we take some form of, let's say maybe equity in, let's say maybe institutions to do with maybe industrial projects, we are able to offload these, at the capital markets. We should not take them as, given and milk them until they die. but we should be able to ensure that at least we are able to go and float them. We have a clear exit strategy. That in itself will also enable the markets to become more liquid and mobilize more resources. But thirdly, it's the issue of the bonds. We should start now entertaining the thoughts of putting the industrial bonds on the capital markets. That way, I think we'll be mobilizing more resources, and SADC could do that. I know currently they are working on a project between Zimbabwe and Zambia. They want to come up with an industrial park. There are two components to that. There is a component to do with the soft infrastructure, which has to do with the regional public good. That money can be given through the grants. But what about the investment angle? All those elements which will come in before the investors come in, where is it going to come in? The two governments could choose to, issue a bond, an industrial bond, and that could go a long way. So those are the few ideas I think we could come up, and I think they could go a long way by us championing those.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Banda. Before we continue looking at the chat, the Q&A, there is a hand that is raised. I'm trying to see whose hand is it. Kutula Sibanda, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, moderator. I would like to really congratulate all the presenters. I think they've touched on almost everything in terms of resource mobilization. And what is critical now is to have a critical mindset on the presentation. Let me say I'm here at the SADC Secretariat as the director responsible for industrial development and trade. And there's a director who is responsible for infrastructure here at the SADC Secretariat. And there's a director here at the Secretariat who is responsible for agriculture. You know how important agriculture is. I think we all acknowledge the fact that infrastructure, industrialization, agriculture, you name it, cannot take place without resources. I think we acknowledge that's a problem. Now, if I refer to Robson's presentation, which was quite telling, you spoke about the ICPs funding SADC. I think we should not confuse SADC and the SADC Secretariat in terms of resource mobilization. We should not confuse the Secretariat and the SADC. SADC is a big thing. If I see a good road driving from Zambia to South Africa, I'm seeing SADC. If I see industries booming in the SADC region, I see SADC. Now, the resource mobilization, which we are talking about when we talk about these 100 million, these are just peanuts in terms of the demands of SADC resources. So 100 million, which is funded maybe 60% by member states, and then there are ICPs like EU putting in maybe 30 million. These have been there for the past 20 years. This arrangement has been there for the past 30 years. But SADC has not been developing in terms of infrastructure. SADC has not been developing in terms of industries. SADC has not been developing in terms of agriculture. We should shift now our discussion away from the coordination costs. I think coordination costs, they are okay, and sometimes more donor resources may even confuse us. So coordination cost, the 30 million, the 50 million coming from the EU, in fact, that is being threatened by the fact that there is fatigue now from our ICPs. And hence, I call upon member states to fully fund the coordination cost of the SADC Secretariat. So to me, that's not where the problem is. The problem is in the domain of infrastructure. The problem is in the domain of industries. the problem is in the domain of agriculture. And that's why maybe Lufeo was saying maybe we need to walk up and smell the coffee and say we are on our own when it comes to developing our infrastructure, when it comes to developing our industries, when it comes for development of our agriculture and investment in the private sector, we are on our own. And what the question is, what should we do? And I think the presenters today have touched a lot of things which are very relevant. The issue of the SADC Development Fund as an anchor or complementary institution to our national financial institutions, because we should not remove the funding of SADC from Zambian banks, from Malawian banks, from South African banks, from Zimbabwean banks. They are responsible for SADC infrastructure development. They are responsible for SADC agricultural development. They are responsible for SADC industrial development. So the question, the instruments that Lufeo has been mentioning are very handy. And the question is, how do we operationalize all these instruments? We should also not forget the issues of investment, putting in place a conducive investment environment to attract resources from maybe external places. The issue of getting free grants, I don't think is an issue we should emphasize. We should get interest-bearing loans from international source markets, like pretty much like what the Afrexim Bank is doing, pretty much like what the Africa Development Bank is doing. We need more instruments that attract foreign investments into the SADC region through creating those that conducive environment to take place. So these are some of the issues which I think we should escalate our discussion towards, instead of what you call grants and charity. Charity will never develop our infrastructure, will never develop our industry, will never develop our agriculture. We need charity maybe to sort of like give us a start. But I think we all know that there is no country that have actually developed structurally through charity. I thank you.
You're mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for that intervention. And I think you hit the nail on the head. As they say, even when they give you in form of charity, there's nothing as a free lunch. I think it was Dr. Banda, and I think someone else also did mention this, the elephant in the room. A lot of infrastructure investments by China, for instance, but at what cost, as it were, and things like that. And the idea behind indigenizing the sources of funding for our infrastructure developments, I think is a great one. So much so that at least we know, even when conditions seem to be crazy, at least that particular money still circulates in our economies, as it were, as opposed to an extractive way of funding what we're trying to do. There's also, and I don't know whether someone wants to respond to that. There are two more comments, and I know we're already starting to run short of time, but I can see Dr. Banda's hand is up, as well as Dennis, please.
Okay, I just wanted to respond to one question which I thought was very critical. What should we do? And I clearly, I think, agree to those sentiments for one simple reason. If you look at the continent, SADC is the only region which has no regional development bank. It's the only region which has no development fund. So in our side, we don't have a regional instrument. And the question is why? And how can we ensure that at least we can have the regional development fund or regional development bank? To me, I think the answer could be within the politics of the economy. And I think lack of leadership. And here I'll be a little bit blunt in the sense that when I look at European Union, I see France, I see Germany taking a lead in most of these serious issues. In the case of Sadiq, I think we do not see a leader in terms of a country leading the countries in terms of a certain direction. And I think maybe this program could maybe shape that discussion with the issue to do with South Africa. To what extent can South Africa take that leadership role to ensure that at least all these smaller countries are able to move in the right direction and the fund can be implemented as soon as possible? If that engagement can be there, and I think through these interventions, if that can be up in terms of the game, I think we can see light at the end of the day. However, going by the way things are moving currently, we might remain, I think, below the radar, and I think we might not even, move in the right direction. I submit.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Banda. Yes, Dennis.
Thank you. Mine is just a minor kind of intervention. I want to situate this discussion of financing so that we have it very clear from as we move forward what we are talking about. And this is just to complement what the Director for Industrial Development and Trade said. We have financing development in the SADC region. As you can look at it, that's one way of looking at it. But we have financing SADC's regional integration agenda. And these are two different things. When I was presenting the RISDP and the costing, the presentation on the costing of the RISDP was meant to address financing SADC's regional integration agenda and not financing development in the SADC region more broadly. Because member states have their own financing needs, which might not necessarily be linked to the regional integration agenda. And I think that comparison, that distinction has to be made. So the discussions and the instruments and all that, they can be applied, I think, in both. But I think we have to situate the discussion so that we are very clear in our minds what we are talking about. Are we talking of financing development in the SADC region broadly? Or are we talking about financing SADC's regional integration agenda? So if the discussion is SADC's regional integration agenda, then of course we will be looking at, when you talk of infrastructure, we are talking of regional projects which are regional in nature. So it cannot be just a road somewhere in, let's say I'm from Tanzania, somewhere in Dodoma in Tanzania, which does not have any regional implication. That is financing development in the SADC region, yes, but it's not really a regional integration agenda. I just wanted to make that distinction as we move forward. Thank you. I submit.
Okay, thank you. I have three questions more. I think I'll read the three of them and then invite responses. It's simply because we have, I think, about 5 more minutes. Yeah. So there is Shaib Salif, I think, is one of our PhD students here, and asking, we would like to know or to find out how SADC supports its member states in terms of their political economics. He asked this particular question because there are some states that are either political or in political or financial distress. And he cites examples. I know you're diplomats in SADC, but he has specific names. I would go to names, but he says that probably, but the issues are around electoral front, they are around democratic rights, they are around freedoms of the citizenry and corruption. So what type of support do you give to countries like those, probably to be able to get out of that particular morass? Then the other is a question by Michael Nokukule. I think managing industrial upgrading and modernization program, a key of all member states, was and is still a good idea for SADC member states. Industrialization strategy and a roadmap. However, aspects such as natural resource levies, export levies, raw materials, etc., should be earmarked in various member states, introduced to fund the industrial upgrading and modernization program and bilateral regional value chains, as well as pioneering investment meant for increasing their productive capacity. As member states, we are also in support. Okay, also, sorry. Member states also need support in terms of structuring of their industrial upgrading and modernization program into viable vehicles such as endowment funds and blended financing instruments. I think that's more of a comment, but someone may be able to respond to that. And then lastly, we have Marlene, who says, coordination and collaboration is important and needs to be intentional. Otherwise, there is no regional frame and alignment. How can we improve this? So those are the last three questions. I think, given time, I have a minute each for those that may want to respond to that. Yes, Mr. Vitima.
Thank you, Prof. I really don't want to respond to those questions, but I just wanted to make a small comment. I think firstly, let me thank all the presenters for the beautiful presentations. But my comment was, I think we all agree on the point that I think there's a huge funding gap because available resources are far less than what is required, especially for infrastructure projects. However, we learned today, I think from Michelle, that there are insufficient spending habits for private sector project financing and largely due to lack of capacity for risk assessment, as it were. And again, we also learned from Dr. Rufeo Banda that the region has huge potential to generate resources for infrastructure financing, but the bottlenecks, such as the poor macroeconomic fundamentals, weak regulatory frameworks for the financial sector, and so many other bottlenecks, including the non-operationalization of the development bank or development fund. So I thought maybe going forward, these are key issues that we need to look at and find ways on how best to resolve these bottlenecks. Thank you. Okay,
thank you. I know Becky may be on my back, but I think on those, the question and then the comments, I think we need to hear.
Yeah.
Yes,
just on one part, and I think I'll go to the last one. Coordination and collaboration is very key. Yes, I think in an area of fragmentation, nothing can be done. So there is need to up the game in terms of how member countries can collaborate at the regional level. And I think this could come in terms of harmonization of the plans, both which are being made at the national level, vis-a-vis at the regional level. And also in tandem with that, it's the plans which we normally develop, let's say maybe by the multilateral institutions, because within those plans, we deal with the RECs and we deal with the member countries. So if there is lack of coordination, then definitely we're not going to implement anything. A good example you can pick is what is happening in East Africa region. And when I mean East African region, by the bank's configuration, you find that there are a lot of projects which are being implemented by the bank. Vis-a-vis us, whereby we only have one project or no project at a regional level being implemented. It's because of lack of coordination. When we speak at a meeting like this, we speak with one voice. Immediately when we depart, we even look back and say, what were we discussing? And that in itself is what has killed us. And I think we need to stop that.
Okay. Dennis?
Thank you. I'll attempt to respond to the issue of political economy. I'm not quite sure I grasped the question very well, but I think it's about how SADC supports some of these countries which have issues. And in my presentation, if you recall, under the foundation pillar, peace, security, and democratic governance, I did mention an objective of strengthening political cooperation, enhancing democracy, good governance, rule of law, human rights, and human security. And in there, if you go deeper into the strategy itself, there are very specific interventions supporting member states to progress towards implementation of SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. So there are very specific interventions which SADC supports its member states. Issues of cooperation and coordination with the African peer review mechanisms promoted, promoted. Again, this is a governance issue. Frameworks on the prevention and detection of corruption enhanced to foster accountability and implementation of regional norms and standards against corruption. So there are a number of interventions which at the regional level we are supporting member states in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, do you have anything to add, as well as Mr. Chukwano? On those particular issues?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think in the interest of time, we are already running late. Unfortunately, I think this is a discussion that can go on for a very long time. I like the type of questions, but also the observations that are coming forth. And I don't think they are new, so to speak. The presentations do highlight some of these things, the lack of political will, the collaboration, which is extremely critical. A few months ago, I was doing a paper and I was looking at, which forced me to look at the history of collaboration or lack thereof in African integration. And some of the stories that we're talking about here are not new. We talk a lot, but when it comes to action, we seem to be wanting with only a few countries, for instance, shouldering a lot of weight, either financial or political and things like that. So it's probably a high time that we start talking about how do we ensure that all this talk amounts to something. Professor Moyo, I hand over to you. And sorry for taking too much of the time that it wasn't. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jacob. Thank you very much. There is a hand that is up. I just want to make sure we give the colleague an opportunity to just say something, and then we will not respond to his comment. But I think is it Deng? Okay, the colleagues who have raised their hands, can you just say what you wanted to say, Deng, quickly?
Yes, yes. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of today's program. And actually, it's a blessing day. I'm delighted with the statement that you will be collaborative with South Sudan directly. And then South Sudan also is one member of the East African community. And the program is, I believe program is going to open a window for us in South Sudan. So we can benefit from your resource person in the program, which at the end of the day will boost the projects which are aimed to be funded in South Sudan so that we cope with other nations as a country of 11 years. We need to be supported by African expertise addressing African issues. And I'm aware that most of the objective will be following into the development of human being himself or herself. And I'm delighted today to be part of the program. I enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed the comment from different countries. Recently, I was in Namibia with UNESCO program, but actually Africa needs a lot of activities, a lot of program, especially the thing which would come from the African people, African refugees, because they would know what can be done based on their environment. Thank you very much. I'm Deng Mialshio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deng. I allowed you to speak because I think it's good for us to make these connections, especially outside our region. And if you could potentially give your details to our colleagues, maybe type your email or something, then we'll find ways in which GIZ and ourselves at CAPSI could touch base with you. Neville, quickly, I see your hand. Just quickly, say what you wanted to say.
No, sorry, I think that's a mistake. I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, colleagues and your excellencies. I think this has been a very, very fascinating afternoon or morning session. I mean, I realize there are people joining from the US who are interested in this. So it's really morning, evening, and afternoon for all of us. But we really wanted to use this as a collection, session gathering, and data collection information for us to curate the kind of training that we would want to offer to the participants, to the cohorts in May and June. And I really take the comments that were made by everyone seriously, including the comments from Mr. Spanda at the Secretariat, so that when we curate these offerings, we are taking into account what's happening at the broader regional level beyond what's happening at the Secretariat level. So I really think that this has been a useful exercise. I want to thank the SADC contact points who are represented here, the line ministries, the ICPs, the different formations in terms of civil society, foundations, the SADC Secretariat. We've been talking to Dennis, to Desiree, to the Director, Mobility, Resource Mobilization and Planning Unit, and of course, to other colleagues that have also been part of this conversation, Mr. Spanda and team there. I also want to thank the GIZ team, in particular, Mr. Robson Chakwana, Vitima and Malone, who have been working with us behind the scenes to put this together. We appreciate the support, and we hope that you found this useful as we found it useful ourselves. The broader Wits University and Wits Business School, where we are located, is CAPSI. I want to thank Professor Mills, the team in communications, Alison, and the rest. But of course, the CAPSI team, I mean, Jacob, Tandy, Itu, Olani Mapaseka, Kira, and the Strativet team that has really been holding this down, Letu and Tembegile. I want to thank the speakers, Michelle, Lufeyo, Professor Mills, Robson, Dennis, and Daniel for an insightful conversation that we've had today. In terms of going forward, we are going to use the information gathered today to customize training for the course that will join us in May and June, and we'll be in touch with all of you that will be attending that. Second, we will arrange for further discussions, and we've been actually having discussions bilaterally with the SADC Secretariat, especially with the SRI, around issues on industry and value chains. And I'm happy that the Director for Industry and Trade was here to take part, but also raise the issues that pertain to some of those key sectors. And so we would want to have a focused discussion, a similar workshop of this nature, where we look specifically on industry, agriculture, and infrastructure. I think one of the things that we want to get out of this is a policy brief on some of these issues, and begin to mobilize and share widely what the issues are and what are the solutions that we are proposing as we go forward as a region. I think we will also share the recording with the participants, and where permission is allowed, we'll also share the PowerPoint presentation. Like I said, we had not really asked speakers for permission to circulate their presentations, but certainly the recording will be made available to everyone on this group. I think one of the things that we are going to request for the cohort members who will be joining us in May and June is to start thinking about the program, a project that they will bring with them, a practical project that you are working on or dealing with at the moment, so that resource people like Lufeyo and others who will be helping you can actually help you to narrow down your projects to bankable items, help you to narrow down that to sources that you can approach, as well as identify the instruments that you can use for purposes of executing your projects. And so we look forward to welcoming all of you to the training cohorts in May and June at the Wits Business School, where we are located is CAPSI. And I want to end by telling you about CAPSI. We are a center that was established to really bridge the gap between resource mobilization, development needs, but begin to change the narrative that currently exists. As somebody was saying, we always look at charity as a way to solving our problems. We are changing that narrative to talking about how we can utilize African resources to better ourselves. And so this is really part of what we do as the center, but we want to utilize the platform at the Wits Business School as an academic institution to produce as much knowledge and research to actually inform the decisions that we take. But we also have a huge unit that focuses on executive education. And this is where we are locating the training modules that we'll be offering in May and June. So thank you very much, everybody. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate the time that you took to spend 3 hours with us online, which is really not such an easy task to do. Have a great afternoon, great morning, and great evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much, and God bless you.